Hi, it's Hiram again, and welcome back to my Python mini video tutorial series. In this video, we're going to create a project in which you have a pile of numbers, and as you keep inputting numbers, it's going to add those numbers together, and it's going to print out the sum, and it's also going to print out a counter that tells you how many times you've added to this pile. It's also going to have a button that clears the pile. So hopefully this video is going to be pretty helpful to you guys. Let's jump into our code. Alright, now our program is going to start at 0, and as we keep inputting numbers, it's going to add our number to the initial number that it has, and it's going to show us the sum. It's also going to have a counter that's going to tell us how many times we've added to this sum, and it's going to have a button that clears the sum back to 0, and it'll also clear the counter back to 0. So without further ado, let's get to coding, shall we? Alright, as always, I'm going to start by importing Simple GUI. Hopefully this font is large enough. I had to zoom in to 125% in order to get it like this. If it's still not legible, I am so very sorry. I will try to do better next time. So what I want to do first is I'm going to identify a couple global variables. I'm only going to really have two in here. My first global variable is going to be my counter, which I'm going to start at 0, and my next global variable is going to be the pile, which I'm just going to write pile. It's going to be the sum of the numbers, and it's just going to keep getting added to. So now that that's out of the way, now we're going to have an input field and a button. So we really only need those two handler functions. As far as helper functions go, we don't really need any. We could write one that does our addition for us, but it would be easier just to have that handled by the handler in the input field. So we're just going to do it that way. The input field handler, I'm going to just call add, and I'm just going to write pass for now, and then I'm going to make the handler for the button, which is going to be called clear, and that's also going to be a pass. Now after the handlers are written, we need to write the code for the simple GUI. So let's create our frame. Frame equals simple GUI dot create frame, and then in the parameters here, the first thing is it needs a title. So we're going to title it pile of numbers with an exclamation point because I love exclamation points. The second parameter it takes is the height of the canvas, and then it's the width of the canvas, and then the last one is the width of the control field. The control field is where all of the buttons and the input labels go. So I like to keep it 200 by 200, even though we're not going to use the canvas in this video. I like to just have it a nice 200, 200, have it a nice square. And the command, or the control panel, where the input field and the button are going to go, I'm going to make that 250 wide. Simply because I want to make my buttons 200 wide, and I like to just have a little bit of room. It's really just personal preference. The last parameter right here is completely optional. The simple GUI is smart enough that it will create a control field that is the right size. So after that, I'm going to do frame.add input, and this takes, I believe, 3 parameters. The first parameter is the label. What do you want it to say above the input field so that the user knows what they're going to be inputting. So for this one, let's make it what number will be added. The next thing is the function that's going to be handling it. In this case, it's add. Now, we do not need, notice, when you run a function, you use the parentheses as well as the name. But when you're using a handler in an input field or button or anything like that, it only needs the name of the function, because you're not running it immediately, it's going to be run when it's used. So the parentheses, not only is it not needed, if you put it there, it will throw an error. And then the last thing is the width of the input field. Now, luckily enough, adding a button is very, very similar. So we write frame.addButton because frame is the name of our simple GUI frame. We can name this anything we want. It is a variable, so it doesn't really matter what we call it. Or, I guess it's an object. So what is our button going to say? Our button's going to say clear pile with an exclamation point. Next, we need the name of the function that's going to be handling that, and that is clear, if I can spell it right, and the width of the button, which is going to be 200. And then lastly, we need to start the frame. So it's going to be frame.start, and there you go. So let's go back over to the add, and let's write some code here, shall we? So the first thing we want to do is when we click enter, we want it to take the entry, actually, I gotta put that there, because input fields have, I think this could be called anything you want, but this entry is what is in the input field when you click enter. We take the entry and we add it to the pile. So the first thing we need to do is we need to take the global variable pile, and we need to, for all intensive purposes, we'll say we're importing it into the function add so that we can edit the global pile, which is this one. Because if we just create a pile in here, it's just going to be a pile only visible to the add function. But we want it to be this one because this is visible to all functions, and our clear function is going to be clearing this pile. So we want to make sure that we're editing this one and not one that's inside this function. So to do that, we just tell it, look, this is the pile we're going to be working with, the global pile, the one that's outside of the function, this one. Next, we want to do pile equals pile plus. Now, here's the big deal. Entry is a string. When you take input from an input field, it's always going to come in as a string. So we want to convert that string to an integer. Now, if the person puts in something that's not an integer, it's going to throw an error. But for the sake of making this program simple, we're not going to worry about catching an error like that. We're going to make sure that only integers get put into our program. So pile equals pile plus int entry, just like that. So what's this doing? This is taking the global pile that we told it to get here, and it is taking its value, adding entry, and then reassigning that to pile. So currently pile is 0. But when this happens, and say I put in 3, it's going to say, okay, well, pile, the variable, is equal to 3 plus 0 plus 3. And that's going to come out as 3, and if we do it again, 6, 9, 12, blah, 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 blah. So as we move on, global pile equals pile plus entry. Do we need anything else for this handler function to work correctly? Yes, we do. We need to take the global counter and we need to add 1 to that, because every time we add a number, we also want to have the counter there. So we're taking the global counter. Remember, global is like worldwide, right? When something is worldwide, it's known everywhere, right? Like Britney Spears. So when you think of it that way, we're saying take the counter that everyone knows and use that one. So counter, and we're just going to do plus equals 1. This is the same as counter. Let me write this. It's the same as counter equals counter plus 1. Should I comment that out or just leave it like that? Let's comment it out. So, yes, I know what you're thinking. Could I have done that for this? Yeah, probably. Yeah, I probably could have. Let's do that. Plus equals int entry. You know, I don't even know why I didn't do that. Now we know. So let's move back onto this. So we've got our pile. We've got our global pile. We add our entry to the pile. We grab our global counter. We add 1 to the counter. But then what? What's next on the list? Well, next on the list is print. What's the pile? So we're going to print pile, and we're going to print our counter. So that should do it for the add entry, the add handler function. So let's just make sure, shall we? Let's play this. All right, we've got our input field, right? What number will be added? We've got our clear pile, which currently does nothing because of the pass. We've got our 200 by 200 canvas. So let's add some numbers. Currently the pile is 0. Let's add 20. And enter 20. 1. Alright, we've got the number 20, and we've added to the pile 1 time. Let's keep going. Let's add 70. Enter. 90, and we've added to the pile twice. Let's keep going. 60. Enter. 150, and we've added to the pile 3 times. So I've run this 3 times, and we can see that it works perfectly fine. For the sake of making this look a little bit better, I'm just going to print a blank line here. And I'm going to write pile, oops, there we go, pile amount, put a colon there, and then just a comma like that, and that'll write it as pile amount, colon, space, and then the pile. So that's an easy way to write strings and to print out strings and variables together. And then this will just say counter. And then comma. So that should print out nice and neat. Let's check it. Let's move this to here. 60. Enter. Pile amount 60. Counter 1. Nice. 50. Pile amount 110. Counter 2. Alright, so far our program is doing exactly as we wanted. There's only one thing left for us to do. We need to finish writing this clear function. So let's define what our clear function is going to do, shall we? Our clear function is going to take the global pile, which is this one, and it's going to take our counter, and it's just going to reset it to 0. So we want the change to it to be global. We want, or worldwide. We want everyone to see it, right? So global pile and global counter, right? And then we're simply going to set pile equal to 0 and counter equal to 0. And let's make it print something fancy, like cleared. That's not very fancy, but it'll do, right? And then print a blank line. So by my calculations, it looks like our program's kind of done, right? Actually, let's leave that. Let's leave that like that so that you know that it's there. Let's see if it works. What number will be added? 60 again. All right, pile amount 60, counter 1. Let's go 500. Oh, let's go another 500. Oh, let's go 667. Oh, look at that, it works. Let's clear the pile and see what happens. Cleared. All right, so we know the print statement works. Let's add 667 again and see what happens. Pile amount 667, counter 1. All right, congratulations. We've written a program that adds numbers